I want to welcome you to the webinar Community Drought Planning. My name is Alyssa Knox. I am a planner in the Environment and Development Department with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCTCOG for short. I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. The webinar is hosted by NCTCOG, and we are funded by the United States Environmental Protection Agency through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I want to give you a little bit of background about what NCTCOG is. We are a voluntary association of, by, and for local governments, and we exist to address the regional planning needs that are present within our 16-county jurisdiction. NCTCOG is one of 24 regional councils within the state of Texas. As part of NCTCOG's water quality management planning work, we host quarterly webinars on water quality and water quantity related topics every quarter. So if you have ideas for future topics for these webinars, please feel free to send them to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and it's also available on your screen. It is aknox@nctcog.org. At this time, I want to go over a few housekeeping procedures for today. Today's webinar is scheduled to last until 2:30 Central Standard Time, where we will hear from two presenters, and then we'll have limited time for questions. I will provide instructions on how to submit your questions later on in the webinar. So the presentation slides and recording from this webinar will be posted under the green banner called Webinars on NCTCOG's Water Resources webpage, which I will also put into the chat. And that will be up within the next 24 hours. Follow-up emails from today's webinar will be sent to everyone who registered. So if you did not register, but you would like to receive follow-up emails, please email me at the email provided in the chat, and I'll make sure you get added to the list. Please remember to keep your microphone on mute to eliminate distractions for our presenters. Today's webinar agenda involves hearing from John Nielsen-Gammon, who will present Texas drought planning tools, and Deborah Bathke, who will present collaborative drought planning using scenario exercises, followed by a brief time of discussion, questions, and answers. I'm going to launch some audience polls so we can see who we have on the call and our familiarity with this topic. Our polls are currently loading, and we should be able to launch that. I'm going to launch the first question, which asks what, hold on. Okay, the poll is live. First question is, what organization do you represent? You can have municipal, state, county, government entity, water, wastewater service provider, college, university, or educational provider, nonprofit, or other environmental interest group, private citizen, and other. Names are not recorded, but the results will be shared just so we can have an idea of who is on the call. Okay, I'll give everyone just a few more seconds until we go on to the next question. It looks like we are 50% municipal, county, state, and federal government entities, followed by water and wastewater service providers. So welcome. Okay, the next question. How concerned are you about future drought conditions? Very concerned, somewhat concerned, neither concerned nor unconcerned, somewhat unconcerned, or very unconcerned. I'll give everyone a few more seconds. It looks like the majority of folks are saying very concerned. So this is the right place so we can learn about these resources available to prevent drought and plan for future conditions. Okay, and then the final question, how prepared do you feel your community is to handle future drought conditions? Very prepared, somewhat prepared, neither prepared or unprepared, somewhat unprepared, or very unprepared. I'll give folks a few more seconds, but it looks like the majority are saying somewhat prepared at 67%. So hopefully by the end of this, you will feel very prepared. Thank you for everyone who participated in our polls. And now to introduce our first speaker. John Nielsen-Gammon is a Regents Professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at Texas A&M University, the Texas State Climatologist, and the Director of the Southern Regional Climate Center. He holds an SB, SM, and PhD degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and is a fellow in the American Meteorological Society and the American Association of the Advancement of Science. He has been a faculty member at Texas A&M University since 1991 and has served as a Texas State Climatologist since the year 2000. Dr. Nielsen-Gammon has written or co-written 74 peer-reviewed articles and 12 book chapters and is an editor of the Journal of Applied Meteorology and Climatology. His recent research activities have focused on extreme weather in Texas and its relationship to climate change. He has received multiple awards for teaching, service, reviewing, and public engagement. He recently served as co-chair of the Predictions, Predictability, and Applications Interface Panel for the U.S. CLIVAR program and is the president of the American Association of State Climatologists. And now, John, you are welcome to take control and begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to show you a few of the tools we have available for planning drought and also assessing drought, because you need to generally understand the current situation and how it relates to historical conditions to be able to at least plan on the short term and also put it in the long-term context. So there's a bunch of questions and answers that could be asked regarding drought, for example, where it's happening. And so I'll show you a tool for that, which is called the Integrated Water Portal that we host here at the Southern Regional Climate Center, which is very good for figuring out whether, for example, conditions at your location are similar to conditions nearby and how that fits into historical context. Second question might be what's happening. And for that, I'm going to show you a tool that we're currently developing that'll be publicly available pretty soon called the Drought Fingerprint Plot. And that's useful in a variety of purposes, including understanding drought susceptibility and understanding why different droughts are producing different sorts of impacts. Third question people tend to ask is what will happen, and unfortunately, forecasting of drought is close to impossible because drought takes multiple weeks to develop, and our ability to forecast on a multi-week to seasonal basis is very limited. There are tools available for looking at whether drought might be developing rapidly, but you never know whether it's going to then rain tomorrow and no drought developed, or whether you're down this ramp, which is going to lead you like something we saw a couple of years ago when we had a heat wave in the middle of June and dried out everything for the rest of the summer. But, we can at least talk about what might happen, and the main tool for that are things like the seasonal outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center. And so I'll explain how to use that sort of tool as well. All right, so the main tool that people tend to use for monitoring drought, which is on a national basis, is the U.S. Drought Monitor. And the basic idea of the U.S. Drought Monitor is representing drought conditions across the United States, but there's lots of ways to zoom in more closely on it. And in fact, Deborah Bathke, the other speaker today, is one of the rotating set of authors for the U.S. Drought Monitor. So if you have specific questions about this product, I'll encourage you to talk to her. But here at the State Climate Office, we do coordinate information and input to the U.S. Drought Monitor. We look at precipitation over the preceding week. We look at reports of impacts. We send out a first draft to an internal mailing list, which you can actually get on if you'd like to. Contact me after the webinar. And we then have essentially a web virtual conference call on every Tuesday afternoon where we go over the recommendations and hear from folks on the ground and come up with a consensus set of recommendations that we pass along with justifications to the Drought Monitor author, who is looking at all sorts of considerations and consistency across states and so forth, but doesn't necessarily have the knowledge of which aspects are critically important for drought impacts during a particular time of year in a particular part of the state of Texas. So we hope to provide some input based on that sort of expertise. The tool we rely on quite a bit for that is something called the Integrated Water Portal, and that's available from the Southern Regional Climate Center website. I could give you the URL, but it's simply just to Google Southern Regional Climate Center, and you'll get there right away. And most of the stuff that's useful there is under the tools column. And I've highlighted the integrated water portal, which I'll show you some examples of. If you were to click on the integrated water portal on the pull down menu, you would get just a blank map of the United States, basically asking you to put in something or other regarding the date if you don't want the current date available. I put these slides together a couple of weeks ago, so they'll be showing you drought information from 2 weeks ago, but hopefully the information will be useful in terms of how to get that. The gridded data would be the type of product to use. You can zoom in on location. You can control what you're going to be looking at in terms of the overlay. So one example from that is the say the departure from normal precipitation over the preceding 60 days. You can choose a variety of time scales, looking out from 30 days out to multiple years. And here we've chosen a 2-month time scale because that was particularly an interesting period for North Texas and Oklahoma. Parts of that area got deluge precipitation, 8 to 10 inches or more above normal is the purple regions. So that sort of information, how is it above or below normal and by how much, gives you some idea as to how impactful the circumstances might be in terms of a water surplus or water deficit. But really, for most drought monitoring purposes, we want to put things in a historical context. How unusual is it to get that much precipitation? How unusual is it for places to be dry? So the primary drought, so that was departure from normal. Here's the percent of normal. That at least tells you how far off you are compared to what normal circumstances are. This highlights the Big Bend region, for example, a lot more, because in terms of the departure from normal, it's fairly small, 1 or 2 inches. But when you normally get 1 or 2 inches of rain, that's a big deal. But to go one step farther to drought index, we highlight the SPI, the Standardized Precipitation Index. And the idea for this is very simple. You figure out what the historical distribution of rainfall totals are for a given period, for a given time of year. And then you convert that to some number, and we plot it on the drought monitor scale so that it's basically looking at percentiles of drought severity. Exceptional drought is the bottom 2 percentiles, so you'd only expect to see that a couple times a century on a given date for a given duration of precipitation. At the upper end, we've got analogous categories. So exceptional wetness, which you do see a lot of, is something you expect to see only once or twice a century on the wet side. So suggestive of flooding, too much water in fields for doing farming operations, potential for flash flooding as well, but presumably plenty of runoff for reservoirs. One problem with the SPI in particular is it's based on the amount of precipitation you had during a particular time window, in this case 60 days. So if you get 10 inches of rain during the previous day, that's going to show up as probably blue on this plot. If you had 10 inches of rain 60 days ago, that will show up equally as much as blue here, but then tomorrow's plot will have that gone completely. Excuse me. In reality, recent rainfall is more relevant than rainfall a long time ago. And I really don't like having precipitation essentially suddenly fall off the map. So we have an additional option under gridded data called the blend. And the blend is looking at timescales centered on 60 days, but is a bit smoother than that. So rainfall 45 days ago counts, but not as much as recent rainfall. And rainfall 75 days ago counts a little bit. So this essentially mimics how the environment's responding to precipitation. But the interpretation of it's just the same as it is with the SPI. It's just sort of a blurry version of the SPI that eliminates those artificial discontinuities in the time series. So I've been showing 60 days. There's also tools available looking at other time scales. This is what 12 months looks like, and you start seeing more drought showing up across the southern part of Texas on the 12-month time scale. It's very important with drought to be looking at the differences in drought intensity at different time scales, because as you know, different time scales matter to different things. A drought in the summer that's been going on for 2 months is going to have big impacts on water usage. A drought in the summer that's going to be going on for 2 years. It's going to have big impacts on water supply. So it's useful to be able to look at different time scales to be able to sort out where and why there are particular responses to lack of rainfall. Another way of looking at that, which again is a product that's under development and will be going live hopefully within the next month or so at the Southern Regional Climate Center website, is something we call the drought fingerprint plot. So let's just focus on the left-hand side for now. These colors should look familiar. They're the same sorts of colors basically that we're using for our spatial products. And the interpretation is the same as well. The dark red, D4, the exceptional drought, and so forth. And what's plotted here is the accumulated precipitation in inches going back from the present. So we were looking at 60-day accumulations. At this particular location, which is the DFW airport, in the past 60 days, looks like based on the thick black line, they'd gotten about 9 inches of precipitation in 2 months. So that's a pretty good amount. The thin line is the median. So typical precipitation for that same 2-month period would only be about 7, maybe 7.5 inches. So they're above median in terms of precip. What would it have taken to be in drought over the past 60 days? Well, only about 20% of the time do you get drought precipitation totaling less than 5 inches over the preceding 60-day period. And in fact, the record indicated by the thin white line is about 1 inch. There was apparently an occasion, don't know which year, when basically for 45 days ending on June 24th, there was 0 precipitation. So even though May and June are typically relatively wet periods, its precipitation is not guaranteed. Now, another thing this plot can show you is what exactly a relatively wet period is. The steeper the slope, the greater the rate of accumulation of precipitation. So in May and June, typically getting rainfall at the rate of about 4 inches a month. But in the cooler time of year, the curve levels off a bit, and it's more like about 2 or 3 inches of rain a month. So you can see the seasonal variations here. You could say, how many days of dry weather might it take to get into drought? And imagine sliding the black curve over by that many days and seeing when you start getting into this colored territory. So maybe another, maybe another couple of weeks of dry weather would have gotten you into drought in the short term. Long term, things were looking better. And in fact, on the right, we're looking at really long-term stuff, the past 5 years worth of precipitation. And once you get past a year or so, we're above median at DFW for multi-year rainfall accumulations. So you can look at this and expect that the reservoirs in the area should be looking pretty good, and indeed they are. let's see, on our drought plot, we saw how wet it was to the west of DFW and also to the southeast. Let's take a look at what one of those plots will look like. So I brought up Corsicana because that has a nice long-term period of record for data as well. And there, they had gotten about 10 inches of rain just in the past month, which, according to the white line, was very close to the record high amount for that period. So on the short term, perhaps more rain than they know what to do with. On the long term, we see conditions have been similar to what they are in Dallas-Fort Worth, above median, but not excessively wet. So that's how one is able to interpret these fingerprints of drought. Just show you a few more interesting locations because to get the idea of the variability of stuff. So in Midland, Texas, the precipitation is even more seasonal and also a lot drier. So they're kind of dry in the short term, but as you get to 6 months, they're in the red, which would be D3 on the drought monitor, extreme drought. And they're sort of hovering around D1 to D3 at the long term. Probably if you translate this on the drought monitor as D2, for example, based on long-term drought conditions, assuming long-term precipitation deficits matter for that location. Drought monitor is not showing the worst conditions at the worst time scale. It's showing aggregate conditions on basically short-term or long-term or both. Here's another plot, Mount Locke, which is near Fort Davis. They'd gotten 2 inches of rain recently, another 2 inches a couple months earlier, which puts them well into normal to above normal territory, but they were very dry during the previous wet season. And see, in 2024, they got about 3 inches of rain when median would, or sorry, about 6 inches when median would have been about 12 to 15. So long-term drought conditions are very poor in West Texas at the moment. And one more plot, Dallas-Fort Worth from June 25th, 1956, when you all know, drought of record, long-term drought in that area, and indeed that shows up on this plot. Record low rainfall accumulated totals over 3-year period and beyond. So that's what long-term D4 would look like on one of these plots. Okay, last tool I want to show you for looking at possibilities in the future are the seasonal outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center. And you can Google Climate Prediction Center and access these. This is the most recently released one, which says equal chances of above, near normal, or below normal precipitation. They break these things into 3 categories based on recent history. If you're in the below category, that's the odds of being in the bottom third of values in recent history, basically. If you're in the green territory, that's the probability of being in the upper third. So that's how you can have something labeled below and still have the odds less than 50%. It's because it's, say, 40 to 50% chance of being in that below third category, 1 in 3 chance of being near normal, and then if I'm doing the math right, something like a 20 to 25% chance of being in the upper third category. So you're looking at basically shifts of probabilities with this. Now, if you're a serious numbers person, pay attention to the next couple minutes. If you're not, you can just check your email for a couple minutes. But if you want to, you can go to this from the official Outlook page from the Climate Prediction Center, the probability of exceedance for temperature or precipitation. And focus on precipitation, you click on one of these P's, and it takes you to a page that has a map and stuff for individual climate divisions. You click on one of those, you're basically looking under the hood at the seasonal forecast. So I've done that for the Dallas region. And again, you have to be a numbers person to understand probability of exceedance. So, hey, the forecast is 100% chance of getting at least 0 precipitation over the summer. Well, that's good, I suppose. You probably knew that already. There's a 50% chance of getting about 7.5 inches. Is that close to historical values? Well, actually, yes, it is. The orange stair-step line is the historical occurrences for the past few decades, and the red line is the actual forecast. So, yeah, sure looks like a near normal forecast, doesn't it? How likely is it that we'd only get, say, an average of 3 inches of rain this summer? Well, you can go to the 3-inch mark and look at probability of exceedance. There's a 95% chance of getting more than 3 inches this summer, according to the forecast, which is consistent with the historical averages. So that's how much chance there is. Then, well, 5% chance of getting less than 3 inches. You can also see on this plot some of the recent historical values. 2024 came in at about 6.75 inches. 23 came in at 4 inches, and so forth. And you can also see basically the range of uncertainty, although some of that actually gets plotted in this information here. Probability of above or below average is listed 33%, but it tells you what those numbers are. And it also adds probability of being in the lowest 10th percentile or the highest 10th percentile. So if you actually need something you can plug into a model of water supply and usage that's consistent with various scenarios in the seasonal forecast, you can actually access that through this product. So that's the precipitation outlook right now for the Dallas region. Temperature outlook is the red line compared to the orange line. It's above normal forecasted, but only about half a degree above normal. And if you look at 24, 2022, 2023, those were all on the warm side. So we're expecting a warm summer, but not nearly as warm as the last 3 years. So those are some of the tools available for looking at drought in historical context and even potential future drought in historical context. Here are the URLs for our website and the website for the Southern Regional Climate Center and the Climate Prediction Center. And I got my email here in case there's a question or you want to help with something that we don't have time to take care of during this webinar. So thank you for your attention. I'll turn the control back over to Alyssa.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your presentation. We will hold off on questions for now, and we'll roll into Deborah's presentation, and then we'll do some questions and answers at the end. So I want to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Deborah Bathke is the Nebraska State Climatologist, an associate professor in the School of Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She is currently leading the development of the state's climate change impact assessment. Before taking this role last year, she served as the climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center for 16 years. During that time, she authored the U.S. Drought Monitor, served as coordinator for the center's education and engagement activities, and developed decision support tools for drought risk assessment. Deborah also served as the assistant state climatologist for New Mexico before relocating to Nebraska. She earned her bachelor's and master's of science from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a PhD in atmospheric sciences from the Ohio State University. She is passionate about climate education and providing people with resources and knowledge that they need to take action. And now, Deborah, you may take control and begin your presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for jumping on this webinar today and inviting me and listening to what I have to say about drought planning. Today, I'm going to be talking about collaborative drought planning using scenario exercises. This is based on some work that was initially funded by the National Integrated Drought Information Systems to look at these scenario exercises and to figure out which ones were most effective for which types of situation. And then later we received funding through USDA, the North Central Region Water Network, and the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development to turn this into an interactive website. Oh, it's not hiding the hidden slides. All right, well, I will just skip through those then. So I apologize for that. So what are scenario exercises? Scenario exercises can be a number of types of different activities that are used to plan and manage a hypothetical disaster. And in this photo here, you can see a much younger me leading an exercise with a class. And for this exercise, they had to choose between two options. And one was, do they want to decrease water demand during the drought, or do they want to increase water supply, and what resources they would need to do that? And we had people playing different roles, and there was some trading and bartering going on with this activity. Here is again, a screen capture of the website that we're talking about today. It's called drought.unl.edu/scenario guide. There's a lot of information on this website, and we won't have time to go through all of it. So I encourage you to go back and visit that site. And if you have questions at a later time, be sure to contact me, and I will gladly help you out with that. I don't really have 75 slides, so in case you're panicking, a lot of these have been hidden from another presentation that was longer. The website's broken down into 4 sections, so depending on where you are in the drought planning process, you can jump in at any point. If you've been involved in drought planning before and you know a lot about it, you can skip that and go right to the types of scenario exercises. Say you've been involved in scenario exercises through Department of Homeland Security and you know the different types, you can jump into the process and you can flip back and forth kind of depending on where you are. I'm only going to touch on a little bit from each of these sections today. Oh, these aren't even okay. So before we start, before we really get into it, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And to do that, we want to think about how we define drought. And on the surface, it's pretty easy. We think we know what drought means, but when we dig deeper into it, it becomes a little bit more complex. Drought can mean different things to different people. It depends on what sector you're in. It depends on where you're located. So for example, a drought and the amount of rainfall that you might get in Beaumont, Texas would look very different than what you would get in El Paso, or the amount that you might get in one location in the summer versus the winter could be very different. Or if you're an agricultural producer versus someone involved in the water supply side of things, your demand in at specific times of years can be different. So it's not surprising that researchers have found over 150 different definitions of drought. To simplify talking about them, those of us in the drought research and drought planning and practitioner world, we largely think about drought within these 5 different perspectives. So one is meteorological drought. So that's a lot of the things that Dr. Nielsen-Gammon was talking about. What are those rainfall deficits and where do they rank? But we also think about things like hydrological drought and what is the effect of those meteorological deficits. How does that kind of trickle through the system, and how does that impact stream flow, lakes and reservoirs, and groundwater? If we think about socioeconomic drought, that's when you're more concerned with how is that affecting the goods and services that are provided in an economy because of the drought conditions. The next thing that I want to touch on are drought impacts and why should you prepare for drought? Well, all living things depend on water. So when drought happens, the effects can be widespread. I'm located in Nebraska. When we think about drought in Nebraska, when we say drought in Nebraska, everyone automatically thinks about agriculture and they talk about agriculture, but the impacts are more widespread than that. So it can impact all of these sectors that are shown here and can have cascading effects. For example, for water supply and quantity, And quality water supply, you think about that at, well, if there's drought, we may not have enough water to provide water services for cooking, cleaning, drinking, but it can also affect water quality that as the water supply gets lower, you can have an increased concentration of pollutants. And so that in turn can then affect health. Drought can also affect energy. Normally we might think of like hydroelectric power, but also for like nuclear power plants and things like that. If you don't have enough water to provide cooling for it, that can affect the energy side of things. Droughts often are accompanied by heat waves. And so when you have a heat wave, there's an increased demand for energy, and you can in turn have these blackouts and rolling brownouts. So lots of different ways that drought can impact society. On this figure on the website, you can click on it and see different examples of what those look like. So drought scenario-based exercises offer an opportunity to address and plan for these different types of impacts before they happen. And here are some ways that that can be. You can have an exercise, and during that exercise, you can use a scenario or a hypothetical drought to identify who and what might be affected by the drought. You can weigh pros and cons of different strategies that are used to reduce impacts, to help reduce your conflict when an actual drought occurs. These different exercise activities can feed into the drought planning process, which in turn can form the basis for your drought preparedness plan, or I think in Texas you call them drought contingency plans. Not sure about that, but I think that's what I heard. So here's another figure from the website, and it's a little bit small, but it's interactive as well. So if you click on one of these icons and you're thinking about where you are in the drought planning process, for example, based on the types of impacts, you can use that information to help you know what type or identify what types of information and indices, like John was showing the standardized precipitation index or some of the tools that the Southern Regional Climate Center provides. You can link those to the impacts. So if you're concerned about crop conditions, there are specific indicators that you can look at that look at plant health and combine that with drought information. You can also use it to, for example, the first stage of writing a drought plan is defining your scope, your scale, who's going to do what in the drought plan. You can do a type of exercise where you work through that and decide roles and responsibilities for during a drought. I apologize that these did not get skipped. Next, I'm going to move on to the types of exercises that we're talking about when we talk about drought scenario exercises. These are based on FEMA's and the Department of Homeland Security exercises. Here we're talking about workshops, games, and tabletop exercises. When you look at the larger scale FEMA and Department of Homeland Security exercises, they do things like drills and functional exercises where you're physically moving people and equipment. We just focused on those where you're in a room and you're talking, or discussion-based exercises. And again, there's lots of information on this on the website. I'm going to just click through and show you a few examples of some of these. So we'll start out with workshops. That's kind of your lowest level. We all think we know what a workshop is. We've been to lots of workshops. The key for a workshop is, and it sometimes gets left out, is the word work. So with a workshop, you have your group of people participating together to gather information, to share or generate new knowledge based on what everyone in the room knows, and to build products. So this is, I think I might have sent you the wrong slides, but this will work. So you'd want to consider a workshop if you want to develop a list, so a product or a list for use in a drought plan down the road, like who or what may be affected by drought and how. If you want to build consensus, you can use that collaborative discussion and focused dialogue during the exercise to come up with consensus on strategies and actions. For each type of these drought exercises, we have some case studies that are there that you can review and find more information on it and get a glimpse of what the scenario looked like, what the types of discussion questions were used in the activity. Eventually, we hope to have a database of different discussion types of questions and evaluations so that you don't have to come up with your own. Why reinvent the wheel? And this, let's see. The next type of exercise is a game, and that's exactly what you would think of. It's using collective learning in a friendly and competitive environment. This is one that took place in East Central Iowa. And so we had referees who scored different aspects of the game. You have winners and losers in the game. It's supposed to be friendly. You can have people playing different roles in a game because there's not as much at stake if you're in a game. I think Texas, probably about 10 years ago, had a couple of drought games that they played here for drought planning. I remember being on part of the development team, but I didn't actually attend the exercise. And I'm not quite sure what the outcomes were from that either. But if you are interested in that, I do have the evaluation outcomes from those exercises and can share that information with you. Again, there are lots of case studies. You would want to use a game if you just wanted a low stakes, entertaining environment. Maybe you have stakeholders from the general public up to those who are used to looking at some of the more technical data, or you have people, or if you're in a basin that has a lot of conflict, a game kind of takes the high stakes out of it and lets people talk about it without things being at risk. The third type is a table type exercise. And this is the one type of exercise where you need an existing plan, a draft plan or a plan that's already been approved and is in place. And in that, you have people sitting around a table walking through their existing drought plan. And the example here is from the Hualapai Nation. And when they walked through their plan, they had things that were in conflict with other parts that they wouldn't have known if they didn't have this exercise. In Nebraska, our drought plan is old enough to be drafted, to vote, to drink, all those types of things. So if we did a walkthrough of our drought plan, we would find lots of errors in it because a lot of things, not necessarily errors, but things that have changed because departments have merged, they've changed names, context lists, and people have retired. There's new people in those roles. And so a tabletop exercise can help you find those types of things. And Alyssa, this is not the activity that we went through. This is not the presentation that we went through when we went through it on Thursday. Because it doesn't have the thyra slides.
There's no thyra slides. I believe
there are no
saw
thyra
them
slides there.
further down.
Maybe they are.
Do you want to give a brief overview of what thyra is and sort of talk through the process a little bit that way?
See, like this is, I don't know where this one came from because it is not the one we went through.
Yeah, this was the one I received in the email. If you want to talk through thyra, and then if you want to provide me with your update slides, I can just send that out in the follow-up email.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's not what we went through. So, so one type of exercise that, and I really wish I had my slides for it, that we went through for a workshop is the FEMA Department of Homeland Security's thyra process. It stands for Threat and hazard identification and risk assessment process. And so any state, local, tribal, territorial government that receives FEMA preparedness grants has to do a THIRA. And THIRAs can be done for, you can pick, like you do a THIRA for any type of thing. People do them for cybersecurity. They might do one for a plane crash. They might do one for a flood event and walk through that process, go through that process. When we started working with THIRA at the National Drought Mitigation Center, we worked with our Public Policy Center in Nebraska, and we couldn't find an example of a THIRA for drought. So we wanted to see how well that would work. And so this THIRA process can help communities understand their risks and identify what we call capability targets. So if this impact occurred, say you had a drought and you had in a THIRA process that we gave was that there was a wildfire in a heavily cattle producing area, how would you want to respond to that fire? Ideally, what would you need to do that? And then you can compare with what you would need to respond to it to what you have and identify those gaps. Let's see what else. We've also done a THIRA process in Northwest Iowa, and that was a really interesting example. It was focused specifically because in 2012, they were the confined livestock operations were literally a day away from a mass casualty event because they were so short on water, and they didn't really know what, they didn't know what they were going to do. And so we wanted to talk through that process, and we had brought together rural water suppliers. We brought together like Department of Natural Resources, different state agencies. We brought together the meat processing plants to talk through this. And initially the rural water suppliers would say, well, we'll just drill a deeper well. And then the state came in and said, you can't, there's a moratorium on drill welling there. We're not going to let you drill another well. And so then the producers said, well, we'll have to destock. And we're going to take all our animals to the processing plant. But the processing plant said, we're already at full capacity. We can't take everyone's animals all at once. So then the discussion came down to where, if you can't bring them here, where are you going to take them in a state that doesn't have drought? And how are you going to get them there? And what are the costs that you are going to incur? And how do you pay for that? And it was really interesting in that you could see this, like that light bulb moment go off, and you could literally see it on people's faces as we worked through these discussions. And the really cool thing about that exercise was then it led to these discussions. You had those light bulb moments, and it made those at the state of Iowa realize we don't even have a drought plan at the state, and we need a drought plan. And so and this all happened, this was my last travel before COVID. And by 2022, I think it was, they had a drought plan that they had approved, and we'd gone through a tabletop exercise with it as well. So these can be really useful if you think about it from what do I want to get out of this, and how do I want to use that information. And I can't remember what else I have. I know I talked about a lot. I'm sorry I don't have the slides. If you want to talk about this more, you can always set up a time with me to go through it. I'm not with the National Drought Mitigation Center anymore, but my office is on the same floor. So I really didn't move anywhere. I'm the state climatologist, and me or my partner in crime that helped me develop this are happy to walk through this with you. I can share information and resources with you. We've been doing these exercises for 20 years. The Drought Center hit their 30th anniversary this year, and we've published different parts of this, to show that it's scientifically sound how we've based it on. And we have worksheets, discussion points, how to develop a budget, how can you find money to help you hold one of these, all the things you need to consider. So
Hey, Deb, if you have your corrected slides in front of you, if you just happen to, if you want to share your screen, you're welcome to use that.
I don't think I was the one showing them when we went through them on Thursday, but I must have been.
Mm-hmm. If you don't have them up, what we can do is I can always send out a PDF of your slides in the follow-up materials as well. But if you have them in front of you right now, you're welcome to share your screen if there's anything else you want to walk through, though.
I
Yeah,
do
go for
have
it.
them if I can. What part are you seeing?
I see questions and discussions right now. We're back to the COG slides.
Okay, so I got to go to share.
Yep, I see the thyra slide. Perfect.
Okay, so we do have a case study on thyra. This one's for the North Platte River Basin. This was the very first one that we did. The thyra core capabilities, there's 32 of these capabilities across 5 mission areas. So prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. All 32 don't necessarily apply to drought. We've never done all 32. We typically focus on things like public information and warning, operational coordination across agencies. We did do fertility management services for the one with the livestock, just because how would you coordinate a mass casualty event? Fire management suppression is another one that works, that is in there. And we also try and look at the long-term recovery for drought too. Here are the basic discussion questions that you ask as part of the thyra process. So we have this drought. How will we be impacted by this drought? What strategies or capabilities do we need to have to respond to those impacts? And then what resources do we need to have to get us to where we want to be? The focus is generally on the worst case scenario, because if you're prepared for the worst case scenario, then anything else is lower than that. And so you should be able to address that. This was pretty much the description of, this is one slide from the scenario for the Northwest Iowa one. We showed them, and this is because this is what their Department of Natural Resources focused on and the rural water suppliers focused on, was stream flow. Like that was their major indicator that they used. And so we had come up with this 3-year drought, 3.5-year drought, what the stream flow levels were. So, and the red is, do I have those backwards? I think I have those backwards in there from when I copied it over. I'm having all sorts of issues with slides today, but at different points we showed this is where voluntary water restrictions came in use. This is where the groundwater levels in the shallow aquifers fell, within a foot of the pumps at one location, so they might have issues getting water out. This is where irrigation restrictions went in and you weren't going to have irrigation for the rest of the season and things like that. So the first question or the breakout that we had was, given the scenario, what impacts and challenges would your community face? The participants came up with those. We put them into different categories. So while they were on their break, we took them and tried to classify them. But they said that based on this scenario, there would be rural homes without water. There would be processing plants and businesses without water. There would be livestock without water. That how would we manage water quality then from that standpoint when we're in a water shortage situation? And so we had a lot more from this. This is just a sample of how we did that activity. Breakout 2 was, what strategies or capabilities should we have to be prepared for these impacts? And again, that's across those 32 core capabilities. So the first one in this picture is showing long-term vulnerability reduction was one of those capabilities. The second photo, or the third photo, is operational coordination. And so we had rotating breakout sessions. So a group would do it, they would leave all their work there, and then another small group would come in and add to that. And so for their long-term vulnerability reduction, there were things like, if we don't come up with a plan, the state's going to tell us what to do. So let's start thinking about it before they can straight out telling us, because nobody, at least in Nebraska, Iowa, Texas, like Midwest and West, they don't want to be told what to do by the government. They want to come up with the solutions for themselves. And so they talked about, to reduce our long-term vulnerability, we need to think about how we can connect between systems, who we can share, what are the contracts going to be like so that everyone's treated fairly and things like that. Again, the outcomes, we took all the outcomes, we put them in, this was all during COVID, so it was kind of a crazy time for everyone, put these all into notes, and then they showed the need and they led to the development of a state drought plan. And tabletop exercises. We've done a couple of these in the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River Basin. And what was unique about this exercise is that was the first time that the state agencies and stakeholders from all 3 states had been together since the Supreme Court decision. And we used this exercise to familiarize staff in each state, but then between states with their roles and responsibilities, to talk about what coordination needed to happen, because different agencies and each state has different triggers for their drought plan. And so how do we handle the messaging if the triggers in Georgia show extreme drought or D3 on the drought monitor, but they're only showing D2 in Alabama and maybe D1 in Florida, and Florida doesn't even have a drought plan. So how do you coordinate when you have all of these things that are happening? And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but here's an example that we have to help you decide, kind of based on your resources that you have, what your needs are, the participants who are going to be participating, and where you are in the planning process, how to pick which type of exercise might work best for you. We have this as a worksheet as well to help you kind of guide you through the process, and you can add 1s and 2s and score it up, and to kind of help you, not tell you the answer because there is no right answer, but help you get a feel for what might be right for you. And again, these are just some of the exercises that we've done. I talked about the Northwest Iowa, the Appalachia, Chattahoochee, Flint River Basin. We also did a virtual exercise in the Caribbean. And we used the specific use of that exercise was to help tie impacts to indicators to help then get you those like points where you are going to start implementing response actions. So again, the outcomes, if you're developing this, we work with you to help you try and come up with outcomes and a process that works for where you want to be. And lots of resources, a list of past events, case studies, worksheets, a glossary, and lots of references. And my email, Tanya Burnett's email. John knows how to get a hold of me if you can't remember that. Alyssa knows how to get a hold of me. I apologize for the issue with the slides. That was crazy. I don't know what happened there.
Thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate your presentation. Like I said, we can get you the correct information. Thank you for being flexible on that. While I share our screen again to get our old slides back up, I do want to create time for some discussion and question and answer. So you can share your question in one of 2 ways. You are welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself, and I will call on you to share your question verbally, or you're welcome to put your question in the chat. But it sounds like we have some great experts on the call, so please use this time to ask your questions. I did have a question myself while we get the slides loaded up. Obviously, time and money are 2 of our biggest resources, especially in our municipal governments, which we have a lot of on the call. How would you go about sort of impressing to leadership that may be hesitant to spend time and money going through drought planning? How should people in that position kind of get their supervisors and community leadership on board and impressing the importance of drought planning? So that's for Deb or John.
Well, I'll give it a start. I think drought is one of those things that people imagine they can get through eventually and so forth. But every once in a while, there's going to be a drought that exceeds capacity to remain suitably functional. For example, in 2011 and the year following, in San Angelo, a large part of that economy is based on the Air Force Base there, and the Air Force Base was seriously considering moving out of town because a reliable water supply couldn't be guaranteed. Most industry needs a reliable water supply. Most residents want a reliable water supply. So you really want to avoid that sort of catastrophe where a place suddenly becomes known as this is the place where it's not reasonable to make a long-term investment because the water supply is not reliable. So it's sort of one of those check boxes for a viable, vibrant future that needs to be checked by the leaders, even though it's something that may not actually happen in the next couple of years.
Deb, did you have anything to add?
I think you pretty much covered it. And just to point out too that there are never or very rarely national or disaster declarations for drought that really just go beyond agriculture. So the relief that's there is for agriculture and that long-term resilience and recovery from a drought. So being prepared is really important.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Susan asked for the links on the last slide. I'm assuming that's the emails to that Deb shared. I put them in the chat. Susan, if there was another link, if that's not the links you were looking for, please let me know and we'll get those over to you. Okay. We'll move forward then. So as we wrap up, I wanted to provide a chance for everyone to provide some webinar feedback as well. There's a link here on your screen. I'm also going to put the link to the survey in the chat. Please provide your feedback on the presentations you heard today, as well as input on other presentations that you would like to see in the future, so we can make webinars that are relevant and helpful to what you're doing in your day-to-day work. Resources related to today's topic and other water quality topics and water-related subjects will be on the Water for North Texas online library. NCTCOG updates that library quarterly with resources. So please check back. We have reports, podcasts, toolkits, and more to support all of your water resources goals. As a reminder, you will receive a link to today's presentation for everyone who has submitted an RSVP, as well as the link to the recording, which will be up on our YouTube channel. Again, if you did not RSVP but would like to receive those materials, please contact me at anox@nctcog.org. Thank you again to all who joined us today, and thank you for again to John and Deb for taking the time to share their knowledge and information with us today. Our webinar is now over. Have a great day. Thanks so much.